Ladies and gentlemen, there comes a moment in a woman's life when she realizes that people can love her today and leave her tomorrow, applaud her in one season and abandon her in the next. She learns, sometimes through tears, sometimes through betrayal, that human approval is fragile and conditional. But when a woman reaches the point where she chooses God over popularity, purpose over people, and obedience over applause, something shifts in the atmosphere around her life. A woman who chooses God over everyone is not loud. She is powerful. She does not need to announce her strength because heaven recognizes her alignment. She may walk alone at times. She is never unsupported. She may lose people, but she never loses direction. When she chooses God, she steps under divine covering, and under that covering, enemy can look but cannot touch. People may misunderstand her boundaries, but they don't understand her battles. They may think she changed, but what really happened is that she grew. She stopped explaining herself to people who never had the capacity to carry her destiny. She stopped shrinking to make others comfortable. She stopped putting God second to keep people close. Untouchable does not mean she is pain-free. It means pain no longer defines her. Untouchable does not mean she never falls. It means she always rises with wisdom. When she chooses God, her discernment sharpens. She can sense danger before it speaks. She can feel distance before betrayal shows its face. She learns to walk away without closing doors angrily because she trusts that God closes what no longer serves her future. When a woman chooses God, she stops forcing relationships that require her to abandon her values. She stops begging for love that costs her peace. She stops compromising truth to maintain access. She understands that anything God sends will not require her to disobey Him to keep it. Her prayers are not desperate, they are deliberate. Her silence is not weakness, it is strategy. Her patience is not passivity, it is confidence in divine timing. She does not rush because she knows what is for her will arrive right on schedule. What tried to destroy her becomes the testimony that elevates her. What walked away makes room for what is sent from heaven. What she lost becomes the seed for what she gains. She becomes untouchable not because people stop talking, but because God starts defending. She no longer fears rejection because she is rooted in acceptance. She no longer fears delay because she trusts preparation. She no longer fears loneliness because she knows God fills every empty space with purpose. Choosing God first removes the need for human validation in a way that transforms a woman from the inside out. It is not an instant change, nor is it a shallow declaration spoken only in moments of inspiration. It is a daily decision, a quiet commitment made in the unseen places of the heart. No applause is given and no audience is present. When a woman truly chooses God first, something fundamental shifts in how she sees herself, how she interprets rejection, and how she responds to approval. She no longer looks to people to tell her who she is. Her identity is no longer up for negotiation. Human validation is fragile. It rises and falls with mood, seasons, and convenience. One day people celebrate you, the next day they question you. One moment you are praised for your strength, and the next you are criticized for the same qualities that once impressed them. When a woman builds her sense of worth on people's opinions, she lives on emotional quicksand. She becomes exhausted trying to stay acceptable, constantly adjusting her voice, her boundaries, and her truth to remain approved. Choosing God first delivers her from that exhaustion. It anchors her worth in something unchanging, something eternal, something not subject to public opinion. When God becomes her primary reference point, she stops asking, "Do they like me?" and starts asking, "Am I aligned?" That shift is powerful. Alignment brings peace even when approval is absent. It allows her to walk confidently into rooms where she is misunderstood, overlooked, or underestimated without shrinking or performing. She understands that being called by God will sometimes make her misunderstood by people. Instead of fighting for validation, she learns to stand still in truth, trusting that what is meant for her will recognize her without her begging for it. Choosing God first teaches a woman that silence can be holy. She no longer feels pressure to explain every decision or defend every boundary. She learns that not everyone deserves access to her reasoning. Her process or her pain. When her confidence is rooted in God, she does not panic when people withdraw approval. She does not spiral when she is not invited, acknowledged, or affirmed. She knows that divine affirmation outweighs public applause. What God confirms in private does not need to be defended in public. This choice also heals the deep wound of comparison. Human validation thrives on comparison, measuring worth by visibility, success, and recognition. A woman seeks approval. She constantly looks sideways, wondering if she is ahead or behind, enough or lacking. Choosing God first breaks that cycle. She realizes that her path is unique, her timing intentional, and her assignment specific. She no longer envies another woman's journey because she trusts the author of her own. She celebrates others without feeling threatened because her value is not diminished by someone else's success. There is a sacred freedom that comes when a woman stops auditioning for acceptance. Choosing God first releases her from the need to perform, pretend, or prove. She can be authentic without fear of rejection, honest without fear of abandonment. She no longer overextends herself to be liked or compromises her values to stay included. She understands that belonging at the cost of obedience is too expensive. What she gains in peace is far greater than what she loses in approval. Validation no longer comes from people. Rejection loses its power. A woman who chooses God first may still feel the sting of being misunderstood, but it no longer defines her. She does not internalize every criticism or personalize every distance. She understands that some doors close not because she failed, but because she outgrew the room. Instead of asking what is wrong with her, she asks what God is protecting her from. This perspective transforms pain into wisdom and disappointment into direction. Choosing God first also strengthens her discernment. She becomes less impressed by flattery and more attentive to character. She is no longer swayed by loud praise or crushed by harsh words. She listens for God's voice above all others, trusting that His guidance will never lead her into self-betrayal. When she hears many opinions, she waits for divine clarity. This keeps her steady in a noisy world and grounded in a culture obsessed with approval. As she grows in this truth, her relationships begin to change. She no longer clings to people out of fear of being alone. She chooses connection from wholeness, not emptiness. She gives love freely without needing it to validate her existence. She can walk away from relationships that dishonor her values without bitterness, because her sense of worth remains intact. Choosing God first allows her to love deeply without losing herself. Over time, this way of living produces a quiet confidence. It is not arrogance, and it does not seek attention. It is the confidence of a woman who knows who she belongs to and why she is here. She does not chase affirmation because she carries assurance. She does not beg to be seen because she knows she is already known. Even in moments of obscurity, she is at peace because she trusts that God sees her faithfulness and honors it in His time. Choosing God first removes the need for human validation because it fills the heart with something greater than approval. It fills it with identity, purpose, and peace. It teaches a woman that her worth was never meant to be voted on. She was already chosen. And when that truth settles deep within her soul, she becomes unshakable. People may come and go, opinions may rise and fall, but she stands firm, rooted in God, free from validation, and secure in who she was always created to be. Alignment with God creates divine protection in a way that goes far beyond physical safety. It is not merely about being spared from visible danger. It is about being positioned correctly in the unseen realm, where battles are won long before they ever manifest in real life. When a person is aligned with God, their life comes under a covering that cannot be manufactured by effort, intelligence, or influence. It is a protection that flows from relationship, obedience, trust, not from control or fear. Alignment begins with surrender. It is the decision to let God lead, even when the direction does not make immediate sense. Many people want God's protection without God's authority, but true alignment requires yielding the steering wheel. When a woman aligns her heart, her values, her decisions with God's will, she steps into a place where heaven responds on her behalf. She may not always see what is being blocked, redirected, or delayed, but she begins to recognize that certain dangers never reach her because she was never meant to be in their path. Divine protection often looks like inconvenience before it looks like rescue. Missed opportunities, closed doors, delayed plans, unexpected detours can feel frustrating in the moment, but alignment with God reframes those moments. Instead of assuming loss, a woman learns to trust that God may be shielding her from harm she cannot see. What feels like rejection may actually be redirection. What seems like a setback may be divine restraint, keeping her from entering a space that would have compromised her peace, purpose, or future. When a woman is aligned with God, she develops spiritual sensitivity. She begins to sense when something is off, even if everything looks right on the surface. This discernment is a form of protection. It allows her to avoid people, places, and decisions that carry hidden consequences. She no longer moves solely based on logic or emotion. She listens inwardly for divine guidance. This inner awareness guards her from manipulation, deception, and self-sabotage. Alignment trains her to pause, pray, and listen before acting, and that pause alone can save her from years of regret. Divine protection also operates through boundaries. When God is at the center, a woman becomes clearer about what she will and will not tolerate. She understands that not every opportunity is an assignment and not every invitation is a blessing. Alignment gives her the courage to say no without guilt and yes without fear. These boundaries protect her energy, her integrity, and her emotional well-being. They keep her from overextending herself and from entering relationships that would drain her rather than develop her. There is also protection in obedience. When a woman obeys God, even when obedience is uncomfortable, she positions herself under divine covering. Obedience does not guarantee an easy life. It does guarantee a guided one. It keeps her from paths that look appealing but lead to destruction. It helps her avoid shortcuts that promise quick results but carry long-term damage. In obedience, she may walk through challenges, but she is never unguarded. God's presence goes before her, making a way through difficulty rather than around it. Alignment with God does not eliminate opposition. It neutralizes its power. A woman aligned with God may still face criticism, envy, and resistance, but those things no longer have authority over her destiny. What is meant to harm her is either blocked or transformed into growth. Attacks that would destroy others become lessons that strengthen her. She begins to see that protection is not always about avoiding the storm, but about being anchored so deeply that the storm cannot move her. Divine protection also shows up in timing. Alignment teaches patience, and patience itself is a shield. When a woman waits on God's timing, instead of forcing outcomes, she avoids premature decisions that could expose her to unnecessary pain. She learns that arriving too early can be just as dangerous as arriving too late. Trusting God's timing keeps her from stepping into roles, relationships, or responsibilities before she is prepared to carry them. In this way, delay becomes defense. Another dimension of divine protection is peace. When a woman is aligned with God, she carries an inner calm that guards her heart and mind. This peace is not dependent on circumstances. It is rooted in trust. Even when situations are uncertain, she feels secure because she knows she is not navigating life alone. This peace keeps her from reacting impulsively, making decisions driven by fear, and from being consumed by anxiety. It protects her mental and emotional health in a world that constantly demands urgency and pressure. Alignment with God also protects a woman's identity. In a culture that constantly tries to define worth by success, appearance, or approval, staying aligned keeps her grounded in truth. She is not easily swayed by trends or opinions because her sense of self is anchored in God. This protects her from losing herself while trying to fit in or measure up. She remains whole even as she grows, confident even as she evolves. Over time, a woman who lives in alignment with God begins to notice patterns of protection in her life. She looks back and realizes how many times she was spared from harm she did not recognize at the time. She sees how certain relationships ended before they could cause lasting damage, how certain plans fell apart before they could derail her purpose, how certain struggles strengthened her rather than destroyed her. What once looked like confusion now looks like care. Alignment with God creates divine protection because it places a woman in the flow of divine wisdom, timing, and covering. It does not make her immune to hardship, but it makes her resilient. It does not remove challenges, but it ensures she is never unguarded. As long as she remains aligned, she is never walking alone. Heaven watches her steps, guards her path, and shields her destiny. And in that alignment, she learns to trust that even when she cannot see the protection, it is always present, faithful, intentional, and powerful. Obedience sharpens discernment and spiritual authority in a way that cannot be replicated by knowledge alone, experience alone, or intention alone. Many people desire clarity, influence, and spiritual strength, but they overlook the quiet discipline that produces all three. Obedience is not a dramatic act reserved for grand moments. It is a consistent posture of the heart that says, I will follow even when it costs me comfort. When a woman commits to obedience, her spiritual senses become sharper, her inner voice becomes clearer, and her authority becomes rooted, not forced. Discernment is developed through listening, and listening is cultivated through obedience. Each time a woman obeys God, she trains her spirit to recognize his voice more clearly. She learns the difference between divine instruction and emotional impulse, between wisdom and urgency, between conviction and fear. Obedience fine-tunes her sensitivity. It removes the static caused by distraction, compromise, and self-will over time. She no longer has to struggle to hear God. She recognizes his guidance with clarity because she has learned to respond when he speaks. Many struggle with discernment because they want direction without submission. They want insight without surrender. Obedience positions a woman to receive deeper revelation. When she follows what she already knows to be right, more understanding is given. Light responds to faithfulness. Each obedient step opens her spiritual perception, allowing her to see beyond appearances. She begins to sense what is hidden beneath words, intentions, and actions. This discernment protects her from deception, unhealthy attachments, and decisions that would pull her away from her purpose. Obedience also strengthens spiritual authority because authority flows from alignment, not assertion. A woman does not become spiritually authoritative by speaking louder or appearing confident. She becomes authoritative by standing under divine order. When she submits to God's instruction, she stands in a position where heaven backs her actions. Her words carry weight because they are not rooted in ego or emotion. They are grounded in obedience. There is a difference between speaking from desire and speaking from assignment, and obedience teaches her to recognize that difference. Obedience becomes a lifestyle. Her reactions begin to change. She no longer responds impulsively to situations. Instead of reacting emotionally, she responds spiritually. She pauses, listens, and moves with intention. This restraint is not weakness, it is power under control. Discernment grows in the space between stimulus and response. Obedience teaches her to create that space, to wait for divine direction before acting. In doing so, she avoids unnecessary conflict and preserves her authority. Spiritual authority is also revealed in how a woman handles resistance. Obedience teaches her that opposition does not mean she is off course. In fact, resistance often confirms alignment. Instead of retreating at the first sign of challenge, she stands firm, confident that her obedience has positioned her correctly. This confidence is quiet but unshakable. She does not argue to prove herself or strive to defend her calling. She allows her consistency and integrity to speak on her behalf. Obedience sharpens discernment by training a woman to recognize the cost of compromise. Each time she chooses obedience over convenience, she becomes more aware of how compromise dulls spiritual clarity. She learns that small disobediences create blind spots, while small acts of obedience create insight. Over time, she becomes less tolerant of anything that clouds her judgment or weakens her spiritual sensitivity. She protects her prayer life, her values, and her peace because she understands that clarity is sacred. This process also builds humility, which is essential for true spiritual authority. Obedience reminds a woman that she is not the source of her power, she is a steward of it. Humility keeps her teachable and receptive. It allows her to continue growing without becoming rigid or prideful. A humble spirit remains open to correction, and correction refines discernment. The more she submits, the more clearly she sees. As her discernment deepens, her decisions become more strategic. She no longer wastes energy on battles she was never called to fight. She knows when to speak and when to remain silent, when to step forward and when to step back. This wisdom is a mark of authority. She understands that not every conflict requires confrontation and not every disagreement requires explanation. Obedience teaches her that restraint can be just as powerful as action. Spiritual authority also manifests in her influence. People begin to trust her judgment because it is consistent and grounded. Her presence brings clarity, not confusion. Counsel carries weight because it flows from lived obedience, not theory. She does not need to announce her authority. It is evident in how she moves, how she speaks, and how she responds. Authority rooted in obedience is recognized, not demanded. Over time, obedience produces confidence without arrogance. A woman who walks in obedience knows that she is supported by something greater than herself. This assurance removes insecurity and the need to control outcomes. She trusts that even when she does not fully understand the path, obedience will lead her where she needs to go. This trust strengthens her discernment, allowing her to move forward without fear. Obedience also protects her from burnout. When she moves according to divine instruction, she is not striving to do everything. She is doing what she is called to do. This focus preserves her energy and maintains her authority. She understands that spiritual power is not about constant activity, but about purposeful movement. Obedience keeps her aligned with her assignment rather than distracted by comparison. In time, the fruit of obedience becomes undeniable. Her discernment becomes sharp, her decisions wise, and her authority respected. She navigates life with clarity and calm, unshaken by confusion or pressure. Obedience has trained her to hear clearly, move confidently, and stand firmly. Through obedience, she has learned that true spiritual authority is not taken, it is entrusted. And discernment is not a gift given once, it is a skill refined daily through faithful obedience. Losing people often precedes elevation, though it rarely feels that way when it is happening. In the moment, loss feels like rejection, abandonment, or failure. It feels personal, painful, and confusing. Yet time and wisdom reveal a truth that is difficult to accept. While the wound is still fresh, before God elevates a person, He often reduces their circle. Before He expands influence, He contracts attachments. What looks like loss is often preparation, and what feels like loneliness is frequently alignment. A new level demands a new mindset, stronger boundaries, and deeper discernment. Everyone who walks with you in one season has the capacity to go with you into the next. Some people are assigned to who you were, not who you are becoming. When growth begins, tension appears, conversations change, values shift, priorities realign. Suddenly, what once felt natural becomes strained. Losing people in these moments is not always about conflict. Sometimes it is simply about divergence. Paths separate because assignments differ. Many people mistake this separation as punishment, but it is often protection. God knows what is ahead and understands what will be required of you. Certain relationships, though once meaningful, may become weight instead of support. They may drain your focus, dilute your vision, keep you emotionally tethered to a version of yourself that can no longer sustain your calling. Losing them is not cruelty, it is care. It is God removing what would limit your reach before He expands your responsibility. Elevation changes perspective, and perspective can be uncomfortable for those who benefited from your previous position. When you grow, you see differently, speak differently, and choose differently. Some people are unsettled by that shift. They may accuse you of changing, becoming distant, or thinking you are better than them. Truth, you are not becoming better, you are becoming clear. Clarity exposes incompatibility. People in this stage is often the result of no longer shrinking to maintain harmony. There is also a refining that happens in isolation. When people leave, noise decreases, distractions fade. In the quiet, self-examination begins. You confront fears you avoided, habits you excused, beliefs you inherited but never questioned. This solitude is not meant to break you, it is meant to build you. Elevation requires inner strength. Inner strength is forged when external support is limited. In losing people, you gain self-awareness, resilience, and dependence on God rather than approval. Losing people also tests motives. It reveals whether your obedience is conditional or committed. When applause disappears, when encouragement fades, when familiar voices go silent, you discover why you do what you do. If your purpose survives rejection, it is rooted correctly. Elevation requires purity of motive, and sometimes people must leave so that ambition can be refined into calling. You pursue an obscurity determines what you can handle in visibility. Another painful truth is that some people cannot celebrate what they do not understand. As you grow, your dreams may stretch beyond the comfort zone of those around you. Your discipline may make others uncomfortable. Your faith may challenge their complacency. Losing people in this context is not about superiority, it is about difference. Elevation often requires courage to walk alone when no one else can yet see the vision you carry. Loss also teaches discernment. When relationships end, you begin to recognize patterns. You learn who supported you conditionally and who loved you consistently. You understand who was connected to you emotionally and who was invested in your growth. This awareness is essential at higher levels. Elevation attracts attention, influence, and access, and without discernment, it can also attract exploitation. Losing people before elevation sharpens your ability to recognize genuine connection when it appears again. There is grief in losing people, even when the separation is necessary. Elevation does not erase emotion. It does not make you immune to sadness or nostalgia. Teaches you to honor what was without clinging to what cannot continue. You learn to bless people as they go without resenting them or idealizing them. This emotional maturity is part of the elevation process. You cannot carry unresolved bitterness into a higher calling and expect peace to follow you there. Losing people also creates space. Space for new relationships, new mentors, and new environments that align with your next level. What feels empty now is not meant to remain vacant. Elevation requires room. New assignments need new support systems. New responsibilities require new wisdom. Old connections fall away. It is often because they have fulfilled their purpose. Holding on too long would prevent what is next from entering. Perhaps the most difficult aspect of losing people before elevation is learning not to chase them. There is a temptation to explain yourself, to prove loyalty, or to shrink back to regain connection. But elevation demands restraint. It requires trusting that what is meant to stay will stay without force. When you stop chasing, you stop bleeding. When you let go, you allow God to restore you in ways people never could. In time, perspective replaces pain. You look back and realize that losing certain people saved you from stagnation. It pushed you to grow, to mature, and to trust God more deeply. You see how those losses redirected your path toward opportunities you could not have accessed otherwise. Elevation begins to make sense in hindsight. What once felt like abandonment reveals itself as assignment. Losing people often precedes elevation because growth requires pruning. It is not a sign that you are failing. It is often evidence that you are progressing. When people leave, it does not mean you are unworthy of connection. It means you are being prepared for expansion. The loss is not the end of the story. It is the transition. And when elevation comes, you will understand that what you lost was never meant to go with you, but what you gained was exactly what you needed. Boundaries are a sign of growth. Arrogance, though they are often misunderstood by those who benefited from the version of you that had none. When a person begins to grow emotionally, spiritually, and mentally, one of the first visible changes is the establishment of boundaries. These boundaries are not walls meant to shut people out. They are gates designed to protect what is valuable. Growth teaches a person that access is earned, not automatic, and that self-respect is not selfishness. In earlier stages of life, many people confuse being kind with being available and being loving with being limitless. They say yes when they want to say no. They tolerate what drains them because they fear disappointing others. They allow repeated violations of their time, energy, and values because they are afraid of being labeled difficult or ungrateful. But growth brings awareness. Awareness reveals that constantly overextending is not generosity, it is self-neglect. Boundaries emerge when a person finally understands that their well-being matters too. When boundaries are introduced, reactions often change. People who are comfortable crossing lines begin to feel uncomfortable. They may accuse you of changing, becoming distant, or thinking too highly of yourself. truth. You have not become arrogant, you have become intentional. Growth teaches you that not every demand deserves a response, and not every relationship deserves unlimited access. Boundaries clarify what you can give without losing yourself in the process. Boundaries are rooted in self-awareness. As a person grows, they begin to recognize their limits, emotional, physical, mental, and spiritual. They understand that energy is finite and must be stewarded wisely. Growth brings the courage to protect those limits without guilt. It allows you to say, I cannot do that, without needing to justify your decision. This clarity is not pride, it is maturity. Arrogance elevates the self above others, but boundaries simply honor the self alongside others. Healthy boundaries also reflect a deeper understanding of responsibility. Growth teaches that you are responsible for your choices, your reactions, and your healing, but not for managing everyone else's emotions. When you set boundaries, you stop carrying emotional burdens that were never yours to bear. You stop rescuing people from consequences they need to face. This does not make you cold or uncaring, it makes you wise. You learn that enabling dysfunction is not compassion, and that sometimes love requires distance. As growth continues, boundaries become less reactive and more proactive. Instead of waiting until you are exhausted, resentful, or hurt, you establish expectations early. You communicate clearly, calmly, and respectfully. You do not wait for conflict to justify your limits. You honor them as a standard. This level of intentionality comes from growth, not ego. It reflects a desire for healthier interactions, not control. Boundaries also protect relationships rather than destroy them. Without boundaries, resentment builds quietly until it erupts in ways that damage trust. Growth teaches that honesty preserves connection. When people know where they stand with you, there is less confusion and fewer unspoken expectations. Boundaries reduce emotional volatility because they remove guesswork. They create a framework where respect can thrive. One of the most powerful signs of growth is learning to maintain boundaries without becoming defensive. Early on, boundaries may feel fragile, requiring constant explanation and reinforcement. Over time, growth brings confidence. You no longer argue to be understood or negotiate your self-respect. You state your limits once and uphold them consistently. This quiet firmness is often mistaken for arrogance by those who are uncomfortable with accountability. It is simply the fruit of inner stability. Boundaries also reflect spiritual growth. Person aligned with their values understands that they cannot honor God's truth or purpose while constantly compromising themselves. Growth teaches discernment, knowing when to engage and when to withdraw. It reveals that being available to everything leaves you ineffective at what truly matters. Boundaries protect calling, focus, and peace. They allow you to serve from wholeness rather than depletion. There is also grief involved in setting boundaries. Growth does not erase the pain of disappointing others or losing relationships that cannot adjust. Some people prefer the version of you that was accessible at all times, even at your own expense. When you grow, you may outgrow those dynamics. Boundaries reveal who respects you and who only valued what you provided. This clarity can be painful, but is also freeing. Boundaries teach self-trust. Each time you honor your limits, you reinforce the belief that your needs are valid. You stop abandoning yourself to keep others comfortable. Growth builds the confidence to sit with discomfort without retreating. You learn that discomfort is not danger. It is often a sign that something is shifting for the better. Boundaries require courage, and courage is a hallmark of growth. Over time, boundaries become less about restriction and more about alignment. They guide you toward environments, relationships, commitments that match who you are becoming. They keep you from pouring into spaces that cannot receive you. This alignment is not arrogance. It is stewardship. You are caring for your life with intention. Boundaries are a sign of growth because they reflect self-respect, clarity, and wisdom. They show that you have learned from experience and chosen to evolve rather than repeat harmful patterns. Arrogance demands superiority. Boundaries simply establish balance. When you grow, you understand that protecting your peace does not mean you think you are better than others. It means you value what you have become. That understanding changes everything. God-centered women don't force relationships because their sense of worth, security, Belonging does not come from human attachment alone. When a woman is rooted in God, she understands that connection is meant to flow, not be strained, manipulated, or maintained through self-betrayal. She has learned, often through painful experience, that anything requiring her to abandon her values, silence her truth, or diminish her peace is not love, no matter how familiar it feels. In earlier seasons, many women force relationships out of fear. Fear of being alone, fear of being misunderstood, fear of starting over. They over-explain, over-give, and overstay in situations that quietly drain them. A God-centered woman has been delivered from that fear. She understands that loneliness is not the worst thing that can happen. Losing herself is. God is at the center. She trusts that no person is her source, and therefore no person can hold her hostage emotionally. God-centered woman does not chase clarity from people who are committed to confusion. She does not beg for consistency from those who benefit from being inconsistent. She understands that relationships built on effort from one side are not partnerships, they are burdens. Because she is grounded in God, she recognizes that love does not need to be forced to be real. What is meant to grow will grow with honesty, respect, and mutual investment. One of the clearest signs of a God-centered woman is her comfort with walking away without bitterness. She does not leave angrily or dramatically. She leaves peacefully, knowing that God does not require her to stay where she is constantly wounded. She trusts that God is both able and willing to replace what she releases. This trust frees her from clinging to people out of habit rather than alignment. She understands that endings are not always failures. Sometimes they are answered prayers. God-centered women also understand timing. They do not rush intimacy or force closeness before trust is built. They allow relationships to unfold naturally, guided by discernment rather than desire. This patience protects their hearts. They do not confuse attention with intention or affection with commitment. Because God is their anchor. They are not easily swayed by words alone. They watch actions, patterns, and character, trusting God to reveal what needs to be known in time. Forcing relationships often leads to compromise. It causes women to ignore red flags, tolerate disrespect, and accept inconsistency in the name of love. A God-centered woman recognizes these moments as invitations to pause, not push. She understands that God never requires her to fight for a place He did not assign her. If she must lose peace to keep connection, she knows the connection is misaligned. Her obedience to God keeps her from settling for less than what nurtures her soul. Another reason God-centered women don't force relationships is that they are whole before connection. They are not looking for someone to complete them. They are looking for someone to complement what God has already made complete. This wholeness changes how they relate. They give freely without desperation and receive without dependency. They do not cling because they know God fills every gap that people cannot. God-centered women also respect the freedom of others. They understand that love cannot be coerced and loyalty cannot be demanded. If someone chooses distance, silence, or departure, they do not chase them down to force understanding. They release with grace, trusting God to deal with hearts. This restraint is not indifference, it is faith. It reflects a deep belief that what belongs in their life will remain without manipulation. Forcing relationships often stems from a desire to control outcomes. But a God-centered woman has surrendered control. She understands that her role is obedience, management. She allows God to orchestrate connections, knowing that divine alignment cannot be rushed or forced. This surrender brings peace. She is no longer exhausted by emotional labor that was never hers to carry. As a result, her relationships become healthier. They are marked by mutual respect, clear communication, and shared values. She attracts people who honor her boundaries because she honors them herself. She no longer entertains chaos disguised as passion or inconsistency disguised as mystery. Her life becomes quieter but richer. Fewer connections, deeper ones. God-centered women also understand that seasons change. Some relationships are meant to walk with you for a time, not a lifetime. They do not force permanence where God intended transition. They honor the role people played without demand, and they play roles they were never meant to fill. This wisdom protects them from disappointment and resentment. Ultimately, God-centered women don't force relationships because they trust God's sovereignty over their lives. They believe that God sees what they cannot see and knows what they need better than they do. They choose faith over fear, peace over pressure, obedience over attachment, and in doing so, they discover a powerful truth. When you stop forcing what isn't aligned, you make room for what is divinely assigned. Their lives may not be crowded, but they are covered. Their hearts may not be attached to everyone, but they are deeply fulfilled. And because God is at the center, they are free. Free to love without losing themselves, free to release without regret, and free to trust that what God has for them will never require force to stay. Silence can be a spiritual weapon, though it is often misunderstood in a world that rewards noise, reaction, and constant explanation. Many people assume that strength is proven by speaking up, defending oneself, or responding immediately. Yet spiritual maturity teaches a different lesson. There are moments when silence carries more authority than words ever could. Silence is not weakness, avoidance, or fear. When guided by wisdom, silence becomes a powerful form of discipline, discernment, and trust in God. Silence creates space for divine guidance. When a woman learns to be still, she positions herself to hear beyond surface noise. Constant talking often drowns out clarity. In silence, the heart settles, the mind slows, the spirit becomes attentive. This stillness allows God to speak without competition. Decisions made from silence are often wiser than decisions made in urgency because silence invites perspective rather than pressure. It allows truth to rise without being forced. Silence also protects a woman from unnecessary battles. Not every accusation deserves a response. Every misunderstanding requires clarification. When a woman speaks too quickly, she often reveals more than she should, exposes her emotions, enters conflicts that drain her energy. Silence gives her the ability to choose her battles carefully, keeps her from reacting impulsively, and empowers her to respond intentionally if a response is even needed at all. As a spiritual weapon, silence disarms opposition. When others expect reaction and receive restraint, their power diminishes. Silence removes the fuel from manipulation, provocation, and drama. It denies access to emotional control. A woman who understands the power of silence refuses to be pulled into chaos for the sake of proving a point. She trusts that truth does not require constant defense. What is real will eventually reveal itself without force. Silence also sharpens discernment. A woman listens more than she speaks. She notices patterns, inconsistencies, and intentions that words alone might hide. Silence allows observation. It reveals character. People often expose themselves when there is no interruption. By remaining quiet, she gathers insight rather than assumptions. This discernment becomes a form of protection, guarding her from deception and misplaced trust. There is humility in silence, and humility attracts spiritual authority. Silence acknowledges that not everything needs immediate explanation or justification. It reflects confidence rooted in identity rather than ego. A woman secure in who she is does not rush to correct every false narrative. She understands that some misunderstandings are temporary, and some people are not meant to understand her at all. Silence preserves her peace, while God handles what she cannot control. Silence also strengthens emotional discipline. It teaches a woman to govern her emotions rather than be governed by them. When she feels anger, disappointment, or hurt, silence gives her time to process rather than explode. It allows emotions to pass through wisdom before being expressed. This restraint is not repression. It is maturity. It prevents regretful words that cannot be taken back and actions that escalate rather than resolve. In spiritual warfare, silence often precedes victory. Many breakthroughs are birthed in quiet obedience rather than loud resistance. Silence demonstrates trust in God's ability to fight on one's behalf. Instead of defending herself endlessly, a woman who embraces silence places her case in God's hands. This surrender invites divine intervention. God sees what is hidden, hears what is unspoken, moves in ways words cannot. Silence also protects sacred things. Not every vision, plan, or promise needs to be shared. Some things grow best in privacy. Silence guards dreams from premature exposure and unnecessary criticism. It allows ideas to mature before being tested by public opinion. A spiritually mature woman knows when to speak and when to wait, understanding that timing is as important as truth. There is also healing in silence. Constant explanation can reopen wounds that need time to close. Silence allows the soul to rest. It creates room for reflection, prayer, and renewal. In silence, woman reconnects with herself and with God. She regains clarity about what matters and what does not. This restoration strengthens her ability to move forward with peace rather than bitterness. Silence does not mean avoidance of truth. It means discernment in delivery. A woman who wields silence wisely knows that words are powerful and must be used carefully. She does not waste them on arguments that lead nowhere or on people committed to misunderstanding her. When she does speak, her words carry weight because they are not constant. Silence gives her voice authority. Over time, silence reshapes how others engage with her. People learn that they cannot provoke reactions or manipulate responses. They recognize that her peace is protected. This respect is not demanded. It is earned through consistency. Silence becomes a boundary that communicates strength without confrontation. Ultimately, silence can be a spiritual weapon because it aligns a woman with wisdom, patience, and trust in God. It teaches her that she does not need to be loud to be powerful, and she does not need to explain herself to be understood by God. In a world full of noise, quiet confidence stands out, and in that silence, God works, defending, directing, and delivering in ways no argument ever could. Faith replaces fear when identity is secure, a truth that many people struggle to understand because they have been conditioned to tie their sense of worth to approval, circumstances, or the opinions of others. Fear thrives where identity is uncertain. It creeps in when a woman doubts who she is, where she belongs, or what she is capable of accomplishing. It whispers lies that exaggerate danger, amplify doubt, and erode confidence. But when identity is grounded in God, fear loses its authority. Faith rises to take its place, steadying the heart, guiding the mind, and empowering the spirit to move boldly, even in uncertainty. Identity begins with knowing who you are in the eyes of God, not the world. A secure identity does not fluctuate based on who celebrates you, criticizes you, abandons you. It does not shrink in response to failure or grow excessively in response to success. Instead, it rests on the unchanging truth of God's love, purpose, and calling. When a woman understands that she is fearfully and wonderfully made, chosen, and equipped for her unique assignment, she is no longer vulnerable to the lies fear tries to whisper. Faith is born from this security. Fear often manifests as hesitation, indecision, and overthinking. It causes women to shrink back from opportunities, question their abilities, and doubt the possibility of divine provision. When identity is insecure, fear is loud, persistent, and paralyzing. A woman may know what God has called her to do, but uncertainty about her worth or capacity silences action. She waits for external validation, reassurance, or permission. Faith cannot take root in that soil because faith requires confidence in what is unseen, trust in what is promised, and courage to step forward without complete proof. Secure identity is the fertile ground that allows faith to grow. Faith replaces fear because it transforms perspective. Fear focuses on what can go wrong. Faith focuses on what God can do. When a woman knows who she is and whose she is, fear loses its grip. The threats that once seemed overwhelming shrink in comparison to the power of the one who walks with her. She no longer measures life by risk alone, but by the certainty that God equips, protects, and sustains her through every challenge. Fear may still appear. It no longer dictates her choices. Faith becomes her default response. Secure identity also instills confidence in divine timing. Fear thrives on urgency, panic, and control. It pushes people to act prematurely or make unwise decisions to avoid imagined danger. Woman whose identity is secure trusts that God's timing is perfect. She waits, prays, and moves deliberately. Faith enables her to operate from a place of patience rather than panic. She is willing to endure delays, setbacks, isolation, because she understands that God's plan unfolds in alignment with purpose, not pressure. When identity is secure, faith empowers boundaries. Fear often causes women to overextend themselves, tolerate mistreatment, or compromise values to gain approval. Secure identity allows her to stand firm in her principles without fear of rejection or loss. Faith reinforces these boundaries because she trusts that God will honor her obedience. She no longer fears being alone or unloved when she chooses what is right. Instead, she operates with peace, knowing that divine provision is greater than human approval. Faith also replaces fear in relationships. Fear makes people cling to approval, manipulate affection, or stay in toxic situations. When identity is secure, a woman engages with others from a place of wholeness. She loves freely without desperation and releases without regret. She does not beg for acceptance or permission because her sense of value comes from God, not from human acknowledgement. Fear loses its influence over her interactions because faith teaches her that God's presence is her ultimate security. Moreover, faith replaces fear because secure identity brings clarity of purpose. Fear clouds vision, creating doubt and distraction. It asks, what if I fail? Or what if they leave? Faith rooted in identity asks, what has God promised? And what am I equipped to do? This shift allows her to act with determination, courage, and consistency. Fear may still be a visitor, but faith provides the tools to confront it, overcome it, and move forward despite it. Faith and secure identity also guard against comparison. Fear thrives on measuring oneself against others, amplifying inadequacy and fostering jealousy. A woman whose identity is grounded in God recognizes that her path is unique and her assignment specific. She does not need to imitate, compete, seek validation to prove worth. Faith affirms that she is already equipped and chosen, which neutralizes fear that comes from doubt or insecurity. Faith replaces fear in decision-making. When identity is unstable, decisions are reactive, influenced by pressure, opinion, or temporary emotion. Secure identity allows for proactive, principled choices aligned with values and calling. Fear may tempt hesitation, but faith guides discernment. She asks, does this align with who I am in Christ? Does this honor my purpose? Faith provides confidence to act even when outcomes are uncertain. Additionally, secure identity and faith nurture resilience. Fear magnifies failure, setbacks, and criticism. Faith interprets these experiences differently, seeing them as opportunities for growth and refinement. A woman with secure identity understands that mistakes do not define her. They are lessons on the path to fulfillment. Fear may attempt to discourage her, but faith encourages persistence, trusting that God's plan is unfolding and that every trial strengthens her for elevation. Faith replaces fear because it anchors hope in the unseen. Fear is anchored in what is visible, what is uncertain, and what is beyond control. Faith is anchored in God's promises, presence, and provision. When identity is secure, a woman's hope becomes unwavering. She can endure rejection, scarcity, and an opposition because she knows that her life is in God's hands. Fear loses relevance because her confidence rests on unshakable truth. Ultimately, faith replaces fear when identity is secure because security shifts focus from self-protection to divine trust. A woman who knows her worth, calling, and divine connection no longer reacts to life from scarcity or uncertainty. She moves with authority, peace, and courage. Fear becomes a temporary whisper, unable to dictate her destiny. Faith becomes the foundation, guiding every step, shaping every decision, and sustaining her through every season. Security in God transforms fear into bold action, uncertainty into obedience, and vulnerability into spiritual power. When identity is secure, fear is not eliminated, but it is tamed. Faith rises to fill the gaps fear leaves, carrying her through trials, strengthening her in storms, preparing her for the elevation God has promised. Fear may knock, but faith answers the door, reminding her that she is chosen, protected, and empowered. Faith is the natural response of a woman who knows who she is, and why she was created. And in that truth, fear no longer rules, faith reigns. A woman under God's covering cannot be destroyed, though she may be tested, challenged, or misunderstood. There is a profound difference between difficulty and defeat. And when a woman walks fully under God's protection, the trials of life become tools for refinement rather than instruments of ruin. To be under God's covering is to live in a realm of divine oversight, supernatural favor, and unshakable purpose. It does not guarantee that storms will not come, but it does guarantee that she will emerge intact, strengthened, aligned with her destiny. Being under God's covering begins with relationship. It is not a cloak she can manufacture through self-discipline or human wisdom. It is a mantle granted through obedience, faith, and intimacy with the Creator. Covering is relational first, spiritual second, and protective throughout. God sees what the eyes cannot see and knows what the heart cannot comprehend. When a woman aligns herself with God, she places herself in a position where divine protection works in both seen and unseen ways. It is a covering that shields her from forces that might otherwise overwhelm her. The protection of God does not remove confrontation, but it transforms it. A woman under this covering may encounter betrayal, opposition, or hardship, but these experiences do not have the power to destroy her. Instead, they become lessons, opportunities, and stepping stones. What the enemy intends for harm, God redeems for her good. She may feel pressure, but she will not crack. She may face opposition, but she will not collapse. There is a divine resilience that saturates her spirit because the covering under which she walks is stronger than any external attack. Being covered by God also means that her identity is protected. In a world that constantly seeks to label, diminish, or misrepresent women, under God's covering are anchored in truth. They do not define themselves by gossip, criticism, or societal expectations. Their sense of self is rooted in divine affirmation. No circumstance, betrayal, or personal failure can shake the knowledge of who they are in God. This identity acts as a shield, deflecting attacks that target self-worth, confidence, and purpose. Divine covering also grants discernment. A woman under God's protection begins to recognize danger before it fully materializes. She senses who, what, and where are aligned with her destiny. What does not? This spiritual awareness acts as a preventative measure, allowing her to avoid traps, toxic relationships, and misaligned paths. While she cannot always control the actions of others, she can navigate them with wisdom and caution, reducing exposure to unnecessary harm. Her steps are guided by divine direction, and under God's covering, guidance is always present. The covering of God also strengthens a woman emotionally and mentally. Life will test her patience, resilience, and faith. She may experience disappointment, loss, or loneliness, yet she carries a peace that the world cannot give, a calm assurance that God is in control. This peace is a form of protection. It prevents panic, discouragement, and impulsive decisions that could lead to self-destruction. It allows her to respond to conflict, challenge, pain with wisdom rather than reaction, keeping her from paths that lead to devastation. God's covering also transforms attacks into testimony. When a woman faces opposition under divine protection, she emerges not only unbroken but refined. Her struggles become evidence of her perseverance and faith. What could have been a source of shame or defeat becomes a narrative of triumph. The enemy may try to destroy her. The divine covering ensures that every attempt either bounces off or is used to fortify her spirit. She is not spared from difficulty, but she is spared from defeat. Another dimension of the covering is provision. Those under God's protection are often supplied in ways that surpass human expectation. She may lack resources in appearance. God makes provision at the perfect time. Opportunities that appear coincidental are often divine interventions. Her needs are met. Her path is directed. Her steps are ordered. This supernatural provision ensures that she cannot be permanently set back because what God has promised will not fail. Being under God's covering also imparts strength and character. Challenges that would break a person who is relying on human strength are absorbed and transformed in the spirit of one walking under divine protection. Adversity becomes a tool for building patience, humility, perseverance, and wisdom. She grows stronger in the crucible of challenge. She learns to rely on God rather than self, and this reliance develops a fortitude that no human force can dismantle. Divine protection also provides relational security. A woman under God's covering attracts relationships and connections that align with her calling. She is surrounded by people who respect her boundaries, honor her values, and support her purpose. Those who would seek to harm her often find themselves ineffective because she is shielded from manipulation, betrayal, and spiritual interference. Even when people fail her, she is never truly abandoned because God's covering is ever present. Ultimately, a woman under God's covering cannot be destroyed because destruction requires absence, weakness, or a loss of purpose. None of these can exist where God is active and present. Her life may be challenged, her plans may be delayed, her comfort may be disrupted, but her essence, calling, and destiny remain secure. Every attack is temporary, every storm is limited, and every trial has a purpose within the divine plan. She becomes untouchable not in an arrogance, but in alignment. She carries authority, resilience, and clarity that come from being under a covering that transcends human limitations. She can face opposition, persecution, and difficulty with the assurance that her life is in the hands of one who cannot fail. Her foundation is unshakable, her future is secure, and her spirit is fortified. To be under God's covering is to walk in protection, empowerment, and divine purpose. It is to live in a reality where no weapon formed against her will prosper, and no circumstance can alter the calling upon her life. She may be challenged, tested, and stretched, but destruction is impossible because her strength, identity, and destiny are anchored in God. In every way that truly matters, she is untouchable, she is unshaken, she is unstoppable, she is covered.